What if planting a tree wasn't just about saving the planet, but about saving a nation's identity? In a world chasing loud solutions, one African country chose silence, and it shook the continent. This is the story of how Burkina Faso is reclaiming its power, one root at a time. What happens when a nation decides to rewrite its future, not with noise, not with loud promises from podiums, but quietly, with its hands in the soil? It started with a problem, a slow, painful decline of plant life, biodiversity, and ancestral knowledge. A land once known for its forests and healing plants was fading. The Sahel, once green and full of life, had begun to dry up. Desertification crept in quietly, steadily. The rains came late, the winds came early, and in between, the silence of falling leaves told a story no one seemed to hear. For years, Burkina Faso watched its trees disappear. Villages that were once shaded and rich in vegetation stood bare. The ground cracked open like forgotten pages from a history book. Medicinal plants, once gathered with care and respect, became rare. Some nearly vanished, and with them, generations of wisdom quietly slipped away. But in 2025, something changed. A young president, once a soldier, did something unexpected. He didn't ask for foreign aid. He didn't rush to international conferences or speak in front of cameras. Instead, Captain Ibrahim Traoré went to a forgotten forest in the center-south region, a place called Ga. The land was dry, worn out from years of loss. He knelt down. Yes, cameras were present, but there was no script, no speech, no lineup of ministers explaining plans. Just him, the wind, the dust, and a small sapling in his hands. He planted it. Quietly, that was it. No grand announcement. Just a beginning. They called it a reforestation campaign. But to many, it felt like something deeper, a reawakening. This wasn't just about trees. It was about reclaiming something buried, a connection to the past, to the land, to healing. 20 million trees, across deserts, savannas, plateaus, every province of Burkina Faso. But not just any trees. These were medicinal trees chosen for their roots, their healing properties, their history. Neem, baobab, moringa, neem. These weren't just plants. They were part of the Burkinabe identity, long before borders or maps. They were used to treat fever, wounds, digestion, fertility, and spiritual protection. Captain Traoré wasn't just planting trees. He was reviving a memory system, a way of life that had been pushed aside for decades. This is how the campaign began, not as a project, but as a quiet revolution. The plan was clear: to create medicinal groves in every province, a living pharmacy, forests of healing, not grown in labs or factories, but nurtured by the land itself. But even that wasn't the real heart of the project. What truly made it powerful, what shook Africa, was how it was carried out. Traoré didn't hand the task over to foreign NGOs. He didn't wait for international grants or outside consultants. Instead, he turned to his own people, from north to south, east to west, every citizen, every background, every generation. He invited them all, not to stand by, but to take part. Everyone was urged to plant, to protect, to carry forward the spirit of healing and rebirth. And if this story speaks to you, subscribe, because there are many more untold journeys from the heart of Africa, stories that remind us, sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin in silence and grow, one seed at a time. The project began to breathe, to grow, and as it spread, something else began to happen. Other nations started paying attention. Leaders across the continent watched, many surprised by what Traoré had sparked. With no press release, no foreign press coverage, number Western sponsors behind him, just quiet, relentless action. And that changed everything. Because what Traoré had done challenged the old narrative of African leadership, the image of leaders waiting, reacting, depending. Instead, this was rooted, it was deliberate, it was sovereign. This wasn't just about planting trees. It was about restoring dignity. It was a message, clear and firm. Burkina Faso isn't waiting to be saved. It's saving itself. With soil, with saplings, with hands that had carried generations of loss, now planting a future. The silence that began in Ga had grown into something larger. It echoed across the continent, and where there was once dust and dry earth, there were now roots, roots growing into forests, forests growing into memory, and memory becoming power, not as a symbol, but as a new beginning. At first, it looked like just a number to 20 million trees. A bold headline, a round goal, enough to draw attention, maybe impress a few donors. But when you looked closer, you saw the truth. It wasn't just a number. It was a map. A strategy, a vision for national healing, not just environmental, but cultural, medicinal, and sovereign. Because each of those 20 million trees was chosen with purpose, not for some corporate carbon offset, not to tick boxes in international climate reports, but for their roots, for their knowledge, for what they carried deep in their bark. Neem, known for its antifungal and antibacterial powers, a natural medicine. Neem, a natural protector in harsh climates. Moringa, the miracle tree, packed with nutrients, used in soups and medicine for generations. Baobab, known as the tree of life, with bark, leaves, and fruit used for healing, shelter, and strength. Neem, whose seeds are fermented into sambala, a vital source of nutrition in rural homes. Each tree was chosen not just to survive, but to mean something. This wasn't landscaping, it was revival. The Ministry of Environment organized the rollout. Botanical maps were created, grove locations carefully chosen. Every province received a tailored plan, shaped by its terrain, its past, and its healing needs. In the South, trees that could withstand dry winds were prioritized. In the greener South, denser groves were planted to provide both shade and refuge. In cities, schoolyards, and hospital grounds were selected, bringing healing not just to forests, but to the people themselves. And then came the most important part, the people. This is where the campaign found its heart. It wasn't forced. It was embraced. Why? Because it was personal. People remembered the forests that once stood, the plants that once healed, the names their grandparents once spoke. Now, they were being invited to bring it all back. But the plan didn't end with planting. Traoré's administration made sure it would last. A national task force was created, equipped with knowledge and tools. Local volunteers were trained to protect saplings during the dry season, monitor survival rates, and pass on what they learned. Seed banks were established in regional centers. Mobile nurseries moved from province to province. And something deeper began to take root. Something quieter, but more powerful than any press release. In a country long told it needed outside help to grow, people were realizing they could build their own future with their own hands. This campaign was giving Burkina Faso back to itself. Each tree became more than just a plant. It became a symbol of resistance to erosion, to forgetting, to dependency. Every time someone planted a tree, they weren't just creating shade, they were restoring dignity. And as the campaign grew, so did its meaning. It was never just about 20 million trees. It became about everything those trees stood for, reclaiming knowledge, reclaiming the land, reclaiming the future. Traoré's vision wasn't only to reforest, but to restore memory, to reseed what had been stripped away by colonial forestry practices, by imported medicine, by decades of being told African land was barren. Now, the land was speaking back, with leaves, with roots, with healing. From the dry plains of Dori to the lush banks of Banfra, the campaign had become more than a plan. It was a pulse, a green rhythm running through villages, markets, schools. And with it came a quiet but radical message: we will grow what we need. We will heal what we lost. We will rise from the soil, not by chance, but by choice. At first, no one noticed. A few local papers ran small headlines: President launches national tree planting campaign, a photo, a caption, a moment overlooked. But then the numbers came in: 0.20 million trees, medicinal groves in every province. A campaign powered not by consultants, but by the people themselves. And something shifted. Africa began to pay attention. Across the continent, the campaign caught fire, not just for its scale, but for what it symbolized. For years, African nations had been told what sustainability should look like. Blueprints written by consultants, imported seed banks, climate plans funded from abroad. But here was Burkina Faso, not waiting for permission, not asking for validation, just planting sovereignty into the ground, and it shook people's assumptions. What if reforestation didn't have to start in Geneva or Washington? What if healing could begin with ancient knowledge, not imported tools? It wasn't just environmentalists who noticed. From Johannesburg to Nairobi, London to Atlanta, Burkinabe youth began sharing photos from the planting ceremonies. Not because they were polished or flashy, but because they were real, raw, dusty, human. A country rebuilding with its own rhythm, one tree at a time. Africa had seen big campaigns before, multi-million-dollar projects announced at fancy conferences. But this felt different, because it wasn't about funds, it was about foundations. It wasn't about optics. It was about ownership. Burkina Faso wasn't just planting trees. It was reminding the continent, restoration doesn't have to be outsourced. And for young Africans watching, it was sending a much deeper message. Leadership, it turns out, can be humble. Impact can be quiet, and vision doesn't have to be borrowed. Sovereignty, a real sovereignty, can be grown. Even some international observers, those used to seeing Africa through a lens of dependency, began to shift their tone. But the Burkinabe government didn't respond with bragging. No world tours, no global panels claiming moral high ground. They simply kept planting. And that quiet confidence, that refusal to seek applause, only made the movement more powerful, because it reminded people of something Africa once knew deep in its roots. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through leaves. Sometimes it moves beneath the surface, like roots weaving together a forgotten forest. This wasn't a movement led by CEOs or credits. No sponsors, no middlemen, just people, just saplings, just soil. And across the continent, it sparked something, not through pressure, but through example. Burkina Faso hadn't tried to shame anyone, but its example had quietly exposed a truth. For all the aid, all the pledges, all the grand climate summits, true environmental sovereignty must begin at home, in the hands of the people, in the memory of the land. And now, as Africa watches, the question isn't just, will the trees survive? The real question is, what else might grow from this? If memory is being restored, could dignity be next? If forests are returning, could people-centered governance follow? Because Burkina Faso didn't just plant trees. It planted a possibility. And that possibility is already spreading, not just through seedlings, but through the African imagination. In the early morning hours, before the sun touches rooftops with gold, you can already hear it, the splash of water hitting dry soil, the rustle of young leaves in the wind, the quiet rhythm of restoration. What began as a silent act in GA is now a national pulse. It flows through the new forests in the south. It hums in schoolyard nurseries and clinic courtyards. It grows where children now sit beneath trees that didn't exist a year ago. And under the surface, deeper than roots, deeper than policies, something even more powerful is taking hold. A sense of return, not to the past, but to something older than memory, wiser than strategy, belonging. For generations, the people of Burkina Faso were told that progress meant concrete and currency, that forests were in the way, that tradition was backward, that healing came in bottles, shipped from somewhere else. But now, across the country, in every province, a quiet defiance is growing, not loud, not angry, just steady. Like bark that refuses to split under pressure, we will define progress on our own terms. And those terms don't look like blueprints from abroad. They look like neem drying in the sun, like moringa leaves finding their way back into kitchens, like a nation no longer bowing to imported solutions, but rooting itself in its own. That's what makes the 20 million trees so powerful. It's not just about planting. It's about participation, the way this campaign asked every citizen to become part of something alive, to dig, to protect, to remember. And through that process, it's not just the land that's healing, the people are too. With each tree, something deeper is being restored, a new kind of literacy, not in French or English, but in leaves, in roots, in responsibility. This campaign didn't just aim to plant forests, it planted futures. Traoré himself has said little since it began, but sometimes silence says more than speeches, because the greatest statements don't always come from stages. Sometimes they come from the soil. And now, as the rains return, to the north, as the trees stretch their arms toward the sky, one truth becomes clear. This isn't just a forest. It's a mirror, reflecting back a version of Burkina Faso that was never lost, only waiting to return. A version that believes in itself, that listens to its elders, that grows, not for headlines, but for the children. And what will they inherit? Not just trees, but trust. Trust in their land, trust in their roots, trust in themselves. Because, in a world that keeps asking African nations to prove their worth, Burkina Faso chose a different answer: to plant it. And when the next generation walks through these groves, when they run their hands across the bark, pluck the leaves, sip the tea, breathe the air, they'll know something unshakable, that they come from a people who did not wait to be rescued, who did not wait for the world to notice, who did not ask permission to rise. They simply stood up, one tree at a time. And that is how nations change. Not overnight, not with noise, but with roots, with remembrance, and with the quiet power of a people who have learned to grow. Burkina Faso has shown the world that revolutions don't always roar. Sometimes they grow. One seed, one hand, one choice. If this story moved you, if you believe Africa's true narratives deserve to be seen and heard, raw, real, and unfiltered, then now is the time to be part of it. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it, and drop a comment below saying, "I believe in African roots." Don't forget to subscribe. We're bringing more untold stories from the heart of Africa, where every tree is more than nature, it's memory, dignity, and power. What did this story mean to you? Could a movement like this grow in your country too? Let's start the conversation. Not just about trees, but about change, real change, grown from the ground up.